Test? Okay. We've all seen fight scenes in movies. And I'm always amazed. One of the big things I'm amazed is they throw people through windows and they never get cut. Where I work, people get cut all the time. Anytime somebody breaks a window, they probably get cut. So it's kind of silly. Some of us have been in fights. Some of us haven't. When I was probably in first grade, maybe around that time, my brother picked on me for like 3 days. But you got to understand, my brother that I'm talking about, my older brother, he actually had a head injury at 12. He's got problems. He still does. But he picked on me for 3 days straight. Just constant barrage of names and whatever and whatever. And at one point I'd had enough. And I picked up a hammer and I went after him. And I took, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 steps, and all of a sudden my hammer was like going away from me. I was like, what happened? And I looked back and my stepdad had the hammer. He knew it was going to happen. He just wondered when. And so he was there to keep it from happening. And quite frankly, I don't know what I'd have done because I was pretty dang mad. I was probably, you talk about Cain and Abel. I probably was just going to kill him. I have to be honest. If they asked me under oath, I'd say, yeah, I was probably going to just kill him. But he stopped me, and I think that's good. And I think one of the things that I do know about myself is I kind of have a long fuse, and so it takes a while, but I think we all have our breaking point. But I also think your breaking point changes as to the circumstances, what's going on, how frustrated you are for other things that day. And so your breaking point probably moves. It's probably a moving target, not a fixed target. Another thing I had, I'd been in some scuffles, but nothing, whatever. And some of those I wasn't even mad or whatever. And another situation when I was a freshman, the guy who actually was our high school quarterback later and all this other kind of stuff, he started picking on me. But he kept challenging me to fight, like, come on, fight me, whatever, and picking on me. And looking back, in fact, I was thinking about this driving in, he had a lot of problems in his world. And I look back and I realized that was probably about the time a lot of his stuff was going on with his parents and all this stuff. But anyway, and I'd go home even as a middle schooler and I'd cry about it because I was so frustrated and angry and everything else because, I knew the Bible said you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to fight. And what if you kill him? And oh my gosh, whatever. And this went on for, I don't know, maybe a week or so because I'd cool down and whatever, but he never got me mad. I just was upset that he would pick on me and I was not supposed to respond. I was supposed to keep turning the other cheek. And so one evening, my mom, who also was a school teacher, and I think she's a Christian lady, but at one point she just said, just beat the hell out of him. And so I went back to school armed with that, going, I don't really, whatever. And so we're in basketball practice, and he threw a basketball at me, hit me in the legs. We were doing drills, and it was with the whole team. And I went to a small school. So we had seniors, juniors, freshmen, everybody there. And he did that. I was like, okay, there's my trigger. He's thrown the first one, whatever, is a ball. But I went after him. And another thing that's weird is another time that the seniors grabbed us. I never even got to him. I was kind of coming at him, but neither one of us got anywhere towards each other. And then the coach came in. What's going on, guys? Oh, nothing, and nothing happened. And he never picked on me again. Kind of weird, whatever. Last week, I liked, because we were talking about Daniel being falsely accused, and God does the fighting for him. Daniel is praying every day to God, but they passed this decree that anybody caught praying not to the king, or not, acknowledging the king, that the king's supposed to be like God, that he'd be thrown in the lion's den. Daniel was an old man at that time. He was, the estimates are he was at least 80 or something. I don't know. I don't know what numbers you want to throw out there. But he was not a young man anymore. We think about Daniel and being taken and being a young person. By that point, he's old. And so he spends the night with the big kiddies and nothing happens, because God took care of him. 1 Peter 5:8, and I've got these kind of spread out, so it may take me a while to find some of these. I had wild thoughts about maybe cutting them up and passing them out, but whatever. 1 Peter 5:8, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. And so that's a kind of a statement about what the devil's up to, and kind of what we're against is that he's like a lion going around looking for who he can devour. Well, one thing that happens many times when we get to a certain point is we also get tunnel vision. We kind of get focused. We kind of get focused on whatever it is. We can't see what is going on around us. And I'm really kind of talking about our daily struggles, the things that, daily fights and struggles. We get so caught up something in our world and not what's happening in the bigger picture or something else. And so that's another thing that can happen to us. Romans 8:38 says, "No, in all these things," and I'm talking these daily struggles, these daily fights, in all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. I think, that's something we use. We're more than conquerors. It's part of our creed here. But I think the key word in that statement is not the no. It's not the in. It's all these things. Conquerors is a big word too. But do we ever sit back and say that God's in charge of everything? And so if we could it's not some, not few, not maybe, all these things. So I'm gonna highlight two people in the Bible today, two main characters, about some things that happened in their lives and how God was involved. First, I'm going to take you to Gideon. So Deborah was the judge, and she ruled over Israel for 40 years, and they were doing pretty good. And then there were 7 years of bad that the Midianites took over. And I'm just going to throw this out there. They said that they were like a locust swarm or like desert sand, how many Midianites there were. And the Midianites, at least 7 years had picked on them terribly, and they needed a deliverer. Like, we'd had Samson as a deliverer, and they needed a deliverer. So you've got this guy Gideon, and Gideon is in his wine press, apparently a place that you kind of scrunch down the grapes to get the grape juice to make wine. It's inside a building, I guess, because you don't want garbage falling in there, whatever. And normally people would kind of work their grain outside, and they had, you've seen where they have oxens turning or whatever, but they worked outside to thresh their grain. Gideon is inside his wine press threshing his grain. So Gideon is not what you'd call, I'm all that, come and try me. He's not a John Wayne by any means. He's kind of cowardly, hiding out in his wine press, doing his grain because he's afraid those Midianites will come and get it from him. He's hiding out. Whatever. So God calls him, and you can't say that Gideon is like, pick me, pick me. Gideon's like, no, prove to me that you want me. And he's, he and this has a conversation with God, and God sends an angel, and the angel says, take this meat and this bread and this broth and put it on this rock and pour the broth on top of it. So now you not only have food, but you got wet food. And then the angel produces fire of the rock, and it burns it all up. I think that's pretty miraculous if you're watching that, kind of going, hey, well, is that enough for Gideon? Well, Gideon destroys Baal's temple, which is a big part of the problem. It's just not the Midianites, but their temples and everything. So Gideon gets out there. He actually gets a new name from his father, Jerubbaal, the one who destroyed Baal, or the one who challenges Baal, or, whatever. But you'd think that's enough, okay, he's, God's called him out and all this stuff. And, well, God says, no, I've chosen you to lead my armies and all this stuff. And so he's like, well, I need a sign. Hey, I'm a little hesitant here. I need a sign. So he says, okay. So this thing about this fleece, and the fleece is left out, and then the morning, and I don't remember which is the order, but anyway, one day it's dry and one day it's wet. And he gets to pick which it's supposed to be, and God does it. So you think that's pretty good, and I guess at that point he seems to be in key with things. He's like, okay, we'll do this. Well, like I said, Midian has, they say, maybe 135,000 Midianites. Gideon has volunteers, and he has 32,000 volunteers that are there to fight the Midianites. They come out of their homes and out of their farms and out of their cities and whatever, and they come to be Gideon's army. Well, God says there's too many of them. Now, wait a minute. You got 135,000 and you got 32,000 guys going to fight 135,000. I did the math. That's like 4.22 men per soldier. You're kind of outnumbered. Kind of. So God tells Gideon, and I'm telling you, Gideon's kind of timid, but God tells Gideon, you got too many soldiers. You know, if you beat them with this, it's only 4.21. If you beat them with this, they won't really see my power. Can you imagine Gideon say, yeah, yeah, sure, no problem, no. I'm sure he's hesitant, but God says no. So Gideon does the thing that some military people would never do, which is goes in front of these people and says, look, if you're afraid, then, if you're afraid and you really don't really take part of this and, you're kind of worried, if you don't like the 4.22 odds or whatever, why don't you just take off and we'll fight with what's left? Well, 12,000 men left. And so I like this because the verse that I really want is the third one. It's the one we've all heard, and I am using the King James Version, but what time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. That is one principle that Gideon took at that point, is saying, I'm afraid, we got a lot of problems, but I'm going to trust in God. But I'm going to read you the passage from David. It says, be merciful unto me, O God, for man would swallow me up. He fighting daily oppresses me. Mine enemies would daily swallow me up, for they be many that fight against me, O thou most high. What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. In God I will praise his word. In God have I put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do unto me. Every day they wrest my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They gather themselves together. They hide themselves. They mark my steps when they wait for my soul. I think it's interesting when he says they gather themselves together and they hide themselves. Wait a minute. They're doing both. But if you think about it, people get together and start talking about you, but then they also turn away from you when they're out to get you, and they hide from you so you can't see that they're really that close or whatever. I mean, that's part of an assassin's job, is get close enough to kill somebody. But they plot and they scheme and they break up and they hide. And so David's watching all this stuff, saying they gather themselves together, they hide themselves. They mark my steps. So in other words, they're even watching his patterns. This is how he does his day, and we're going to watch and see what he's up to, so we can kind of figure out any point we could take him out maybe. When they wait for my soul. Shall they escape by iniquity? In thine anger cast down the people, O God. So he's praying. He says, take care of them. You tell us my wanderings, put you my tears into your bottle. And they actually, one of the translations says like a wineskin. He's actually saying, capture my tears. Are they not in thy book? Are the tears, aren't you not keeping track of all this that they're doing to me? Which also, I know I'm going to go away from this a little bit, but I meant to say this earlier. Have you ever seen anybody that's so mad that they're crying? That's so angry that they start crying. I've seen kids that can do that. And they sit there and they're fighting mad, but they start crying, but yet they're coming after them. And you've seen them. And so here he's saying that, he's crying, David, he's an adult. When I cry unto thee, then shall mine enemies turn back. This I know, for God is for me. This time he's talking when I verbally cry out to you, not physically cry. In God I will praise his word. In the Lord I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not be afraid what man can do unto me. Thy vows are upon me, O God. I will render praises unto you. For you have delivered my soul from death. Will not you deliver my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living? So David is like, well, we're good with this. So Gideon, Gideon's got these guys, and he's got them down to 10,000, and he's probably thinking, okay, now we can go take them on. But he's still doing the math now, and that's not good math at all, Now he's moved up to 13 and a half per person. Not great odds. Yeah, Vegas would have a holiday on those odds. It's like nobody would be betting, It's kind of like when they talk about these Super Bowls when the team is so good, nobody bets, unless you bet on point spreads. So the only bets would be, well, Gideon's army is going to be destroyed in a quarter of a day. Oh, no, he's going to be destroyed in a half a day. Oh, he's going to be destroyed in 15 minutes. Oh, he's going to, so that's maybe how the bookmakers would do that. But, it's a conclusion. Gideon's probably going to get his butt kicked. But then something else happens. God says, no. He says, take them down to the river. And I actually broke this down into translation because I want to do it that way. So, I've got it on the backs of these, I forgot. So he says to Gideon, separate, basically, pull them apart. Those who lap the water with their tongues. So it says, so Gideon brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog. And then there's another, I don't know where my other page is. Here it is. From those who kneel to drink. So through the ages, it's funny, you can even look at art. People have trouble with this. They you can hear people talking about stories of different ways of how this is. You can see different translations. Your NIV may differ from another translation about what's happening here. And the reason is because I think it's a word picture, and we are trying to make sense of that word picture and put it together. Because in our mind, we're trying to sort these soldiers out. Okay? And I'll say that openly because I think that's the big deal. Because in the bigger picture, it doesn't matter to me in some ways which ones he chose, because Gideon's still now down to 300 soldiers. There's the miracle, not which ones he chose. But I think I maybe can make sense because this is one of the translations that we've got, and I think that if you use this, and this is not what you're going to see, but it's this is how they've literally broken it down from the Hebrew. Separate those who lap the water with their tongues from those who kneel to drink. Okay? So we get this image that you're going to get to water, and some people are going to get down on all fours maybe and push it out of the way and drink. Some people may kneel and get water. There's actually a way you could actually streak down and get it and get drinks. But the whole drinking issue is still back to how they do it with licking. And I also even looked and found something last night that I thought was fascinating, because people study this stuff and it's really cool. But apparently a dog's tongue is different than ours, and a dog's tongue can act like a cup and actually pour more water per lick than we can. We don't get as much. But I think the big thing is we're talking about the difference between cupping and getting water in our hands to try to drink it that way versus taking it and licking at it. Okay? But the kneeling is still a pretty big deal, because one of the things that goes with this, that one of these commentators talked about, is that he doesn't want soldiers that'll kneel and fall down to just anything. And the kneeling is like kneeling to Baal's temples and to his whatever. And so part of the process is he's choosing men that don't kneel, that don't, they don't get down on all fours. Now that may also say they're a better soldier because, they're going to still be alert and be able to drink and look. But the kneeling is an important thing. So if they didn't kneel, they're okay. And so I think there really is a way that somebody could do this and do this and do this without kneeling. So I don't know. But it's kind of the kneeling and the lapping is important. And so he basically divides them that way. Not in how they drink the water. Are they on all fours, or their knees, or their whatever? And so you could make an argument. And when you say, is this kneeling? We would say, though, this is kneeling. So this says, if you're here, to get up is harder because you got another step to even get to there. But if you're here, it's fast. And so even if you want to call that a difference, I don't know how they're going to look at that. But, so somebody could be on one knee. But it still supports what some people have talked about, is that are you paying attention? Are you vigilant? Are you a surgeon? Are you a soldier who is paying attention versus one who's just in there doing whatever he's going to do? But the bigger miracles, they're 300. It has nothing to do with how they did it, but and obviously Gideon understood what he was supposed to be separating them and how he did that. So that wasn't, I think, a big deal. Okay, so they basically, he separates them. They go into the camp. They create a lot of noise. They throw torches. The Midianite army gets all confused, starts fighting with each other, kills each other, runs off, and it's all over. So who did the fighting? It really wasn't Gideon. So looking forward at another person I was going to talk about. So David is on a mission from his father Jesse. David is the shepherd boy. David has been chosen by Samuel. Saul knows it. Saul's the king. Or at least he knows there's somebody out there. But I have to remember all that. But basically, David is just a shepherd boy. He's just showing up because his dad said, go take this to the troops. They need food. And while you're there, go give my best to your brothers and tell them they better be good soldiers, because if they're not, I'll take care of them. Whatever, he gives them all their, advice and stuff, fatherly stuff, and sends David off. Well, David gets there, and every day there's this plain and this field, and they're lined up on two hills, and every day this giant of a man, Goliath of Gath, stands up, and he challenges them every day. And he calls them all kinds of names, and he does all this kind of stuff, and he's just trying to pick a fight. This goes on for days. I mean, I'm not talking 3 days like I was talking with my brother. This goes on for weeks. And so obviously nobody in the Israelite army is like willing to take this guy on, which also says they're afraid, and I think they're also maybe sitting there going, well, what if we take him on and lose? The deal is, he said, these two people fight and it's all over. So there's a logic thing there too about, well, what if somebody does mess up? So, Saul's kind of sitting there, they're thinking about this. They're probably strategizing and talking about, how do we do this, and what if, and whatever, and whatever. Well, David hears that, and he hears him talk about, David hears him talk about his God, and he's like, you don't talk about my God that way. David's a little boy. He's impulsive. David says, I'm going to go get him. His brothers may be trying to hold him back. He says, I'm going to do it. Well, they take him to the king. The king's like, you would do this? The king probably thinks it's comical. He's like, well, okay. Tries to put his arm around him. David's like, I can't wear this stuff. I can't even get out of it. I look ridiculous. I don't know if Saul's saying, let's make this even more funny, Maybe Saul's thinking, let's just little comic entertainment. Let's sit him out there. Because even if he beats David, you don't think Goliath's going to say, yeah, you sent your best and I beat him, and okay. So even they're probably saying it's just going to be a fun day and we'll just deal with it, but we're not going to fight that day. Or the other thoughts are, maybe Israel's thinking, well, while David's out there, we'll get our troops ready and we'll make a counter. We'll kind of flank them or whatever. I'll be watching this. They'll be distracted. There's some strategy going here. It's not just David that's here. There's something else happening that we got to look at and whatever. And, I don't know what really was going on, but I'm sure there's something else was happening. I mean, Saul's advisors may have said, hey, this is great. We set this up. It's this kid going out there, and everybody kind of starts flanking, and we get ready, and we attack them when it's over or whatever. We got a chance. This is an opportunity. I don't know. So David gets out there, and he picks his 5 rocks, and he's just got his sling. And David doesn't look at this guy as the giant that he is. I don't know if you've looked at as a kid at people you grew up with and then see them as adult. But the people that were, and I'm not talking tall, but the people that you respect and everything else, they have a few more chinks in their armor when you get older. They're not all as high and mighty as you thought. They're humans. But you didn't see them that way. The coach when you were a kid, oh my gosh, that's coach, pick anybody. That's coach so-and-so, just like our sports players. That's so-and-so, oh my gosh. Well, so David sees him and is not really worried about him. And the other thing that's kind of funny about the whole story is David, even as a small boy, has already killed a lion and a bear. He has dealt with what most men would say, oh my gosh, it's a lion. It's not a human. It's worse. It's got claws. It's got teeth. It's massive, whatever. David's killed them both. So David's not really scared. But then again, he's a young man and doesn't really sit around and think about being scared, does he? And so David gets out there and he basically tells Goliath, he said, dude, you don't say that about my God. Just like somebody said, you don't say that about my girlfriend, or you don't say that about my family. You don't say that. And Goliath's kind of going, Yeah, and he probably just throws out some more cuss words or whatever. And he's like, and David's like, David doesn't say, I'm going to take you down. That's even funnier. He never tells Goliath, I am going to kill you. He said, my God is going to deliver you into my hands, and the birds of the air and the beasts of the field are going to eat on your body. You're done. Your history. You're toast. It's not me, just like David probably said when this lion and bear is, God help me. I've got a lion. God help me. I got a bear. How do I deal with this? He's probably the same thing as a kid. He's got faith, and he believes God's going to do it, and God's done it before. And he's like, let's go. And so Goliath's like, well, how much do I got to chase him, And without thinking, so he's really done his guard up, and David just beans him with one rock in the middle of the head and concuss him, and he falls down. And this is the funny part that, quite frankly, years ago I didn't remember. I heard this story growing up and everything else. But this is a comic moment. But so my kids are, little, and we're reading bedstuy stories, and my son asked to read this story, so I grab the Bible and I read it. And I read to the point that David hits him and Goliath goes down. And that's what I remembered. That's the story. I mean, I thought, it's done. That was it. And he goes, no, read the part about where he cuts his head off. And I'm talking, this is a preschooler. My son, I'm like, who in Sunday school has been reading that part to you? That part is PG-13 or worse. That's not just in his skull. But the things that we know from medicine and stuff, if you get concussed, you pass out. Just like that's how they put bulls down, cattle, is they have a stun gun and they hit them and concusses them. Goliath wasn't dead at that point. Goliath could have gotten back up. The stone just took him down where David could get to him. And then David took his sword and cut his head off. So I had to read that to my son. I'm like, oh my gosh. I just now turned this Bible story PG-13 or whatever, and I got to read about it. You wanted to hear the gore. I know. Just like kids like to be scared. It's kind of funny. Kids really have an innate thing that want to, and that's another thing about some of this, talk about fear and fighting and stuff. But my niece, who was about this tall, I went to go visit, and we were having, I don't keep ages. She was little. But, she knew me, and we did all kinds of crazy stuff. I babysat her a few times and stuff, so she knew me. Well, we're having a family meeting. I don't know if it's somebody's birthday or an anniversary or whatever. And I'm running a little bit late to get to the house. And I open the door, and I get in there, and I look around. And this is my sister and her family, her husband's family, and then my family. So we got two families in this assembled. There wasn't a seat in the house kind of thing. And I'm in the doorway, and hi, everybody, how y'all doing, And I look, and my niece is hiding behind the door in the kitchen. She's the baby, but she's like cowering. And I looked at her, and I said, either you come over here and give me a hug, or I'm going to get you. And everybody, you hear gasps, like, you're talking to the baby like that? Like, you're being mean to her? She did like a Twinkle Toes Flintstone dance and then ran right into my arms. I had verbally scared her, but she knew not to be afraid of me. And so it was pretty funny because they are all like, they were not expecting that. They thought she'd be running and hiding, and they didn't know that she knew that, hey, I'm with you. Let's go. So moving forward, though, Psalm 28:7, and this is using some stuff that David, some of David's Psalms. Should have found some way to keep all this straight. Psalm 28:7. This is years later after all this. The Lord is my strength and my shield. In him my heart trusts, and I am helped. My heart exalts, and with my song I give thanks to him. One sentence, but it kind of summarizes a lot of what David is feeling and has felt through his life, a different way of saying, but this is, David gives credit where credit is due. Ephesians 6:16. I'm kind of giving you verses. If you're in the fight, here they go. Ephesians 6:16. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith. Okay? Pick up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one, meaning Satan, devil. In all circumstances, take up that shield of faith. You know, it's not something you can see, but it's there. And it works, so do it. 2 Chronicles 20 and 25. Maybe 20 to 15. Yeah, no, it's 20. I said 2012. It's 2015. Because I have that one. Okay. And he said, "Listen, all Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem and King Jehoshaphat. Thus says the Lord to you, do not be afraid and do not be dismayed at this great horde, for the battle is yours, not but God's." Okay? And so they're talking about the battle belongs to the Lord. That's not your fight to worry about. It's God's. Okay? Psalm 121, 1 through 8. Where did I put that? There it is. And this one, I really like this one because you have a time you can see that if you put yourself in this set of verses, you can see that no matter what's happening around him, no matter what struggles, no matter what the fight is, no matter what's going on, David feels alone in this verse. And it also kind of you get the image that he's in the bottom, he's in the valley, and we're going to talk about that. It says this is called a song of ascents. David says, "I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is the shade on your right hand." And so David is reflecting back, but those are words of encouragement. That's something you could tell soldiers before a battle. It's something that you can use as a rally cry, as something to kind of get people excited. Okay? But we've got to take this, because I think we've got to take this picture and look at it in some different ways too. Because as a believer, we can have all this. But as an unbeliever, you can say, well, can they draw on this? And the reality is no, because they don't have our faith and they don't have this. But at the same time, you can say, well, what if they have not heard about the gospel? Well, Romans 1:19 through 32 says, "For what can be known about God is plain to them." He's talking about telling believers to the unbelievers, God, what is known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, for they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. In other words, they can look at, what they're kind of saying here is, God's creation speaks to the master builder, the master planner, the person who did it. God's creation says there is a God. You look at the stars in the sky and you lay there and you keep looking, you'll see another star. We got scientists with major telescopes, and there are more galaxies, and there's nothing to sneeze at. There's tons of stuff. You can look in the ocean and start studying the ocean, and there's abundance. I mean, it's amazing the different types and species of fish and what happens at different layers. And now we got the technology, we can get down to the deep levels and find that there are even fish down in the parts where they can't even see. There's stuff like that our earth constantly is reminding us that there is a God. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. So Romans says they don't really have a choice. I mean, it's laid out. Even if we don't talk to them, they still should be able to get it. And then Romans 1:20, which is kind of in the same vein, but it's like, for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Okay, 2 Corinthians 10, 3 through 5. For though we walk in the flesh, this is talking about where the battle is really waged. Is the battle in our mind? Is it in our heart? Is it with our hands? What's really happening? For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. Now, one of the things that happened in my world working with some teenagers in a youth group, I was confronted by one of the young girls, and she said that there's a kid in her class who doesn't believe in God. And she said that, it made her angry, basically. It would send her to tears because this guy would always talk about her God. Like David's talking about, you don't say that about my God. Well, this young girl was like, he does this, and he knows that I believe in God, but he still does it to pick on me and whatever, and to be mean to me, and all this is happening. And I had to reflect on that, and I thought a little bit, and I stopped and I said, wait a minute. If this kid really, really, really believed that, he wouldn't be messing with you, because what's he get out of this, If he really wasn't looking, why would he bother you? He'd just move on, say, okay. It's kind of like how sometimes, the Bible says, if you try to come to a house and they don't believe you, dust off the dirt and move on. I said the reality on this guy is that he is seeking. He is looking for God. And I said, and the weird thing is, quite frankly, it's not your job to defend God. You don't have to. You don't have to try to fight with him verbally or whatever. You can just tell him that you believe, and he can have his beliefs, and that's okay. Because that's kind of be your response, because you're just kind of basically saying, well, you can try to fight this, but, it doesn't affect me in any way. I know what I believe and whatever. I like this one because I looked it up this morning because I was driving in thinking about this one too. For the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. People that are picking on you, we've heard the statements about kill them with kindness. But a big part of that is be willing to be under control when they assault you, when they say things about you, when they do that. I think in many ways this time in our country right now is going to be a difficult time for kids and teenagers and everything else, because there are so many verbal assaults in politics about other sides. It doesn't matter which side you're on. They're both talking bad about each other. They're not really using much self-control. It's like, it's amazing the stuff they're saying, and we're just going to have to put up it until things settle down at some point, hopefully. Isaiah 59:19 says, so they shall fear the name of the Lord from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun. So from the west to the east. For he will come like a rushing stream, which the wind of the Lord drives. It's a pretty powerful image. And he's in charge. His glory's all over, and he's going to come in like all this water, but it's going to be driven by wind. And at the same time, I think that Isaiah is also in a different verse, but he's talking to, a little earlier actually, but he's talking to who do you put your faith in when it hits the fan? Who do you put your faith in when things are not going well? Because I think many times we have a tendency, I know that I do, to try to work harder, do more, push harder, try to, you get frustrated, you try to make it work, peace doesn't fit, try to make it fit, you can go on and on. But Isaiah 31:1 says, woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, because there were some of the kings of Israel that went to Egypt and paid money and tried to get, Egyptians protect them from these other people, who go to Egypt for help and rely on horses, who trust in chariots. And I got to see a Discovery Channel on the invention of the chariot and how it's a weapon of war, and it's incredible. Because not only is it something you can get run over by the horses, or it can have blades and the wheels that can cut you down because you're a foot soldier, but there can be people up there slinging rocks at you or shooting arrows at you, and they just keep moving. And so it's a, it would be like the equivalent of, modern warfare, and then here's a tank. And now we go beyond that to airplanes and whatever, drones, but it was the best, highest tech at the time, who rely on horses, who trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong. But do not look to the Holy One of Israel or consult the Lord, because he's saying, they do that. But the truth is, you don't have to look for all this power and everything. God is your power. God will fight for you. Let's see what I've got here. I had just a few more. I didn't really have a good way to try to keep this straight. I know that. Okay, 1 Peter 3:15, 17. Okay. Kind of staying in that theme. But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Okay? And so for her, this guy's going to try to assault her about God, and she should say, well, God is holy, and that's who I serve. Always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, because they may see that you're different, and this is what you do. It says, yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, when they do talk about you, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it's better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. In other words, it's kind of like we talk about your sins will find you out. No matter what you do, the truth will come out. And so at some point, and even maybe the truth may not come out on this planet, but still, you should be upright enough to stick with the goals and everything and say that, I'm following God, and you guys can do whatever you want to, but I'm following God, and you guys can say what you want to. I'm following God. You guys can do this to me, and I don't care. I'm following God. Okay. And of anybody who knows persecution and has been in kind of personal fights, it would be Paul. Paul, who was kind of like the general. Paul was the one that, when they stoned Stephen, they put the cloaks at Paul's feet. He was there. He was in charge. He didn't have to, he could just say, done. He was the mafia boss. He was the, whatever you want to say. That was Paul. Paul didn't even have to get his fingers wet. Didn't have to do anything. Didn't have to pick a rock. But Stephen's going to get stoned. And so Paul moves from that to doing what he's doing to try to preach the gospel. And along the way, he gets punished and everything else. But also Paul is amazing because he uses his standing as a Roman against the Romans. It's really a fascinating, fun deal to watch Paul in action. But Paul suffered. Paul still got, flogged and everything else. And he said, I, Paul, myself entreat you, by the meekness and gentleness of Christ. I who am humble when face to face with you. In other words, what he's saying is, you get to see the meek me because, but bold towards you when I am away. I beg of you that when I am present, I may not have to show boldness with such confidence as I count on showing against some who suspect us of walking according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. So he's saying that, there are strongholds and there are things in our world and that we think that we can't overcome and everything, but prayer can do that, and we can do that, and we can overcome those strongholds. But a big part of that is still love, patience, kindness, self-control. If we can have the self-control to not lash out, to not be provoked. Because like I said, it may be something that, let's face it, Goliath was trying to provoke Israel. It didn't really work. He provoked David. And David provoked God. And it was over. But it was not, whereas, I'm sure that they were thinking, well, if just anybody will come out for Goliath, they'll run after that because Goliath's going to destroy them. And take every thought captive to obey Christ. And so I don't know. kind of let you meditate on that. But part of the thing I was struck with Brian last week about talking about Daniel in the lion's den and the different stories we have in the Bible. There's even the song, "The Battle Belongs to the Lord." But during the battle, how many times do we back down and say, it's not about what I can do, it's about what God can do. And whatever God's doing is still His plan, and I should be good with that. Even though I don't see it now, even though I don't understand it, yes, I have to follow His leading, His teachings, but He's going to do the fighting for me. And, He'll take it from 32,000 down to 10,000, down to 300. And none of my men get hurt. 300 men, 300 soldiers, not a scratch. Any thoughts? Okay. I guess at this point we're going to do communion. Carl, do you want to pass it out? So we do communion the first Sunday. It's kind of funny, though. The world looks at our battles as being, we look at, who's got the biggest weapon, who's got the whatever, but the battle really belongs to God. And ultimately, God's the judge. But it had to start somewhere. There had to be something that could take care of our sins, because we are fallen and sinful, and Jesus came to do that. And He's meeting with His friends and His disciples and His people that He's mentoring, and he's in an upper room. And He takes a simple act that they certainly fully wouldn't understand until later, and they see it, and they start understanding it in their culture. But even today, theologians don't fully understand, and they talk about, and they discuss, and debate. They don't fully understand what was really at stake, what really happened, what really, they have trouble finding words to describe all this. Because Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and He's sweating blood, and He's praying, God, if there's another way, I'd rather not do this. I know what's going to happen, and I don't really want to do this. If you could find a better, isn't there something else that could happen? But then the disciples watch Him crucified. They watch the Lamb being slain, just like they had watched for thousands of years on the altars in Israel, as the priests would come in and bring the animals, and they'd have the blood and the sacrifice, and they'd burn it. And so Jesus is saying, this is my blood. And, even with, like I said, great thinkers of the world, this is my body. And we don't really know how to deal with that. And different religions fight about that. And so I'm not saying we're going to understand it, nor do I really have great plans to try to understand it. Martin Luther gets mad. Martin Luther was, I consider, a pretty good soldier in God's army. But Martin Luther gets mad at one point in German. He says, "Est ist corpus meum." Jesus said, "This is my body." And so whether it's figurative or not, we can fight about all that day. But in fact, the battle's God's. And so let's not worry about that. And it says, "Do this in remembrance of me." So He took the wine and the bread, and I just want you symbolically to break the bread. You got to remember which one to open first. But I want you to take the bread, and I want you to break it, just like Jesus broke it for His disciples. This is my body, which is broken for you. Because we had to have something to pay for our sins. And He said, "This do in remembrance of me." And He took the cup. And I think it's fascinating, too, to this day, how many movies, how many stories, and how many things are all based on just the cup, the Holy Grail, just the cup that Jesus drank through. It's like, people come along and say, "Hey, Carl, I got this cup. Jesus used it. Would you buy it?" Well, I got authentication. I got documents. Nobody has a clue where that cup is for thousands of years. But people are still entranced by just the cup. I'm more entranced by the blood that was in it, or the wine that was in it. It'd be interesting to see what they tasted. But this is my blood, which is spilled for your sins. Take and do in remembrance of me. Carl, will you close us? And I hope we have a blessed week.